Hi, it's Daryl again. Just got this one. This news article came out a few days ago, and I keep meaning to make a video about it for a couple of days, but whatever, I'm making it now. Air New Zealand to resume flights to Japan in late June. I thought this was interesting because everyone was saying that Australia might be the first country that we resume flights with. And just so I'll just make my point. My opinion is that we should just not be flying to other countries until I think that we have to know that the country that we're flying to has to have very tight border restrictions, and if essentially needs to have had 1 month with nobody sick in the whole country. That's if I was choosing a limit, then that would be it. You'd have to have, just to make it easy, 1 month, preferably 40 days perhaps, with zero sick people in your whole country with COVID-19, because doing anything else is pretty silly. So anyway, we'll just have a quick look at the article. They want to start flying at the end of June. The airline said it will fly one return service a week to Narita, Tokyo, starting on 25th of June. The flight is its first scheduled international service since the shutdown long-haul routes at the end of March. Last week, Japanese authorities said that they would allow New Zealand business people to entry without quarantine conditions, provided they are COVID-19 free. We're pleased to be able to welcome customers back on board as we restart services to Narita this month. However, we know the rebuilding of our international network is going to take a considerable time. I think any airline that they, it's never going to go back to how it was, I don't think, because there's two reasons. One is environmental. International air travel is just not sustainable in any way at all. You could possibly use electric planes at some stage to do some stuff, but basically almost all flights are optional, and all of it is highly pollutive. So just not gonna. If we want to be looking after the environment, then we've got to never get back to bulk tourism. And then proposals to start trans-Tasman flights put forward by an expert group are being studied in New Zealand and Australia governments. Earlier on Wednesday, Air New Zealand announced that it was refunding 15,000 customers on whatever. There is another one. Is any airline that takes money for tickets and then doesn't let people actually fly to the place that they want to go to should just give their money back. After all, they're not spending money on that fuel anyway. So that's that article. And so if we just sort of have a look at this. So this is Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and so denial of entry. For the time being, foreign nationals categorised below are denied permission to enter Japan as one who falls under Article 5, Paragraph 1. Whatever. Okay. So basically, foreigners who stayed in any of the following countries, regions, cities, provinces within 14 days prior to the application for landing. And really, if you just look at it, it's literally a list of every country that anybody would ever fly to. It is sort of effectively all the main countries of every continent. I think it says that there's 111 territories here, and I presume that the other places are places that you just can't really travel to. So that's a little bit comical. This is the graph for Fiji, but if we look in here and get the graph for Japan, they've got their COVID-19 infections down to 170 people in Japan infected with COVID-19 this time, and it's been going, had a peak and down. So, it's possible that Japan. Anyway, this is this is about flights of people to Japan. Still, everybody entering New Zealand has to have 2 weeks in a quarantine facility that should be controlled. Now, it's been a bit scandalous in New Zealand because some of the quarantine control hasn't actually been very good recently, and people better buck up their ideas because, again, we don't want to have an outbreak of this infection in our country. So there's that. And just for comparison, we should have a look at Australia. Why can't I find the menu now? So if we go Australia, there's 412 people with COVID-19 in Australia currently. So again, I actually only reckon we should open the borders to countries when they've had nobody sick in their whole country for a month. That's when you should open borders. And of course, you don't want people transiting those countries. So you're only going to have to, like countries like New Zealand should only open flights to countries which have extremely good control, like extremely rigid medical systems that are actually doing well. So the numbers are coming down in Australia, but they're not low enough yet to reopen flights. And I think if you look at it, state by state, I think that's something that you can do. Can we get data? I'm not sure how to see the. You can. No, not that one. You can't get it to. No, okay. Let's try the scroll bar. There we go. I found it. Scroll bar. So some states have the infections down to 0, but that doesn't mean. And I think that Australia actually has the borders between states closed, so theoretically you might be able to reopen flights to states that have no cases. That's a possibility, but really what you want is for the whole country to have none. And I mean, a lot of flights are going to be to Sydney or Melbourne, and there's still cases going on in those cities, so can't open up an Australian thing yet. Okay, so here's the New Zealand. So if we do the search, and I just put some dates here and go search, and you get the same. New Zealand government rules for COVID-19 could affect your travel plans. So if you're flying to Japan and then back to Japan, you would probably have to go through quarantine when you come back to New Zealand in any case. Unless they just change the rules. I guess the government can just change the rules at any time. And really what you don't want is just silly allowances of people. So you can see that there's sort of no seats available. So here's a seat here. And so these flights, I think normally before COVID-19 you could fly return to Japan for maybe around $1,000. So now it's more than $1,000 each way. So there's some way you could do that flight. If we now can you now that I've inconveniently opened it that way, it's a little bit annoying. But the interest was that, so they were saying weekly flights, and when I scrolled through this, I found a weird anomaly. Look, there's 2 flights there, and when you keep scrolling, what was that? Was that a week with? There's a week with 3 flights. So this is meant to be 1 flight per week. So I don't know how they define 1 flight per week, but I would normally think that means 1 flight per week, not 3 flights per week. It's also possible that some of these ones potentially might have a flight on them, but you can't fly on it. I know that they're moving cargo flights between various countries. What I found weird about this is when I scrolled through it the other day and had a look, there's actually a point where, here we go. And look, there's daily flights. So there's daily flights to Japan there. So somehow they're opening up booking availability for daily flights to Japan, even though they've just allowed one flight per week. So I find that a weird anomaly. Yeah. So I suppose if we click through here a few times, because everybody loves a video of people clicking on a button to try and see where that's going. Yeah. So the Air New Zealand is putting in the flights with the assumption that normal resumption of flights, even though that these flights, as far as I can tell, are much more expensive than they normally would have been, which would mean maybe they're having social distancing measures, or they don't expect many of the seats to actually be sold, or something weird's going on there. Yeah, I just thought that people should be aware of that. I'm just curious. I mean, what if we go Australia? I suppose you have to choose a city, right? Let's go Melbourne. And just search and see if there's anything. Oh, look. Yeah, there's lots of flights to Melbourne. So as far as I understand, passengers that are going on these flights at the moment are people just repatriating, and these flights are basically going on top of cargo flights. So they need to move cargo, essential cargo, medicines and medical equipment, and high value imports and exports are being freighted. If you buy a new phone online, it's probably going to come from the store in Sydney for some brands of phones. So these things happen. So they have these flights, and there are seats available. But I mean, you can't go for a holiday. And Japan, in their thing, they said they're only going to enable flights for essential business travel. So, yeah, it's pretty weird. Yeah, I don't really think that tourism's great anyway. I'm not a big fan of tourism. I think that tourism's just a waste of resources. I am in favour of the idea that people should be able to travel to another country to live there for 6 months or a year or long periods. I've taken a few holidays to very far off locations for relatively short amounts of time, but it tends to be that because everywhere is far away from New Zealand, when I travel, say to the Northern Hemisphere, I normally want to go for around a month or so. Otherwise, it's just not good value for money. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. I'm actually quite disappointed that they're re-enabling flights so quickly to various places, and if that all goes wrong, you can squarely blame politicians and pressure from business people. So if I'm going to say something against globalism, it's that globalist people just want to push an agenda of opening up flights between places, and I have no idea really why, because it mostly, with this virus around, it certainly doesn't serve the people in most countries to have potentially ill people coming in. And a double whammy is that if there's any chance that ill people are entering this country just to go and do tourism things, then that will kill internal tourism, because most people will not be really willing to go to a restaurant or a cafe or go out to a bar if they think there would be sick people there. So the opening of the economy problem is that the smart money is going to stay home. Like, most people are going to try to avoid going out in public and potentially exposing themselves to this virus. So it doesn't logically make sense to allow tourists to come from potentially infected countries to start zooming around all our tourist sites, because that will kill our internal tourism. So the tiny numbers of people that can travel internationally, you're not going to make up if you allow 100 people in per day into the country to go to these tourist sites, nobody will want to go to tourist attractions with those people. So the other thousands of internal customers that you'd have at those tourist sites, a lot of them won't go because they don't want it to be exposed to recently arrived foreigners that may be carrying the virus. So go figure. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about that. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment. If you think I'm really wrong and you want to give me a thumbs down, tell me what I'm wrong about in the comments. Thanks.